Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the Honda CB300R, and in my opinion, it's one of the most overlooked low displacement bikes. Now, I'm gonna call it a low displacement bike, and you're probably gonna wanna call it a beginner bike. I usually hesitate to call things beginner bikes, but I'll give you this one. Honda is advertising this as a beginner-friendly bike, but we're gonna talk about this because there's a lot of interesting things here that I think people do kind of overlook. It's definitely aimed at newer riders, so we're gonna talk about how it relates to you. But before we go too far, if you're wondering why I'm covering Honda and you missed the past few videos, I'm finally able to cover Honda thanks to Riverview Honda. They give me complete access to their entire vehicle lineup, whether that's automobiles, whether that's motorcycles, ATVs, side-by-sides, you name it. I've got access to it, and we're gonna make sure that we fill this channel with all kinds of content, in addition to all the other brands that I cover. So, springtime's hitting here, 2025s are coming in, there's gonna be a whole lot of video. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, but if you really wanna support just me, just watch this video to the end. That really helps me out, and the more I can grow, the more access I get to more vehicles, more brands for different types of things. We can grow this channel and do more things with it. All right, let's get going with this review. So let's place this bike in a class, and in the past it would have been easy to do. The CB lineup from Honda was kind of the standard motorcycle. That's literally what they called it, standard. Now, of course, we refer to this sort of style as a naked bike, but there's a lot of weird things going on. If we call this a beginner's bike, we can do that, but a lot of brands have beginner's bikes starting around the 500-ish cc mark, which of course Honda also has plenty of competitors in the lineup, and we're gonna review the CB500R next week here, so there's lots coming. But Honda confuses things a little bit because they have the mini moto line with the Monkey that we just reviewed last week. We're gonna have the Grom on here and all those other smaller displacement bikes that are 125 cc's, and things get confusing for what is a beginner bike. This is what I would call the standard beginner bike of when I grew up, and it's a great way to fall in love with motorcycling that isn't something that's different or weird. The Honda Monkey is a bike that I absolutely loved. I'd love it for a second bike. I'd recommend it as a beginner bike, but I feel like this is what's gonna get you into motorcycling, and the standard style is one that I recommend more so than something like the Rebel 300 or something else. I think a lot of people like sport bikes, so they get on something at a rider training thing. It's a little, a CB125 from the past, and it's a sport bike type position. They fall in love with the sport bike look, and they want that, and then they find out that sport bikes aren't always that comfortable. And then you get people who want the really low seat height, so they go with something like the Rebel. They want the cruiser look, but a small cruiser is really not a whole lot different than this, and if you're a newer rider, the way that this is set up, the way that it's going to fit your body is going to make it easier to ride. There's some simple physics involved, so we'll talk about that in just one second, but let's show you what it's like with me on this before we get into the full review of piece by piece. So I want you to think of an athletic stance. An athletic stance in most sports is something like this. Whether you're playing tennis, whether you're playing football, if you're playing baseball, getting ready, whatever you are, you kind of spread your legs, you get a little bit low, you have a kind of nice bend in your legs. Now, take a look at that athletic stance this way. It's very similar to what you get on this bike. So let's take a look here. We have a slight lean forward. We have my legs spread, my knees bent, and when you get into the bike, again, that sort of knee bent kind of thing, it's not too extreme and behind you. It's not too forward where you don't have the balance like you would on a cruiser. It's very much below you. Now, I'm about 6 feet tall, and this bike fits me quite well. So if you're shorter than me, you can easily reach the ground. I can easily flat foot with bent knees. Like, it's not a problem if you're shorter than me. If you're really short, sure, the Rebel's gonna be an option for you. But I think this is what a lot of people should go with. It's fairly compact. You feel very much in control whether you're doing slow speed maneuvers or higher speed maneuvers, and that's one of the things with motorcycles, and it's because you have that athletic stance. The reason that athletic stance is so popular in sports is because it balances your body, and you feel very balanced, which means you can feel what the bike is doing, and the seating position, your hip is kind of one of your main contact points on this bike, or around your hips, and you can feel what the bike does in a familiar way, if that makes any sense. So this seating position makes sense for new riders because you don't have to learn what the bike does in this position or in this position. Your body will already feel, hey, the back end's bouncing around like this, the front end's kind of moving around, and as you hit different bumps, you can feel what's going on. It's a better bike to learn on in this style, which is just my opinion. So let's talk about a couple things about this bike, but we'll start at the front, work our way back, and there's one stat in particular that I think blows people away when they find out. So we'll talk about that in just one second. So if you've seen my reviews of bikes in the past, you're going to know that I love to start at the front wheel, and I always say it's because you can tell the manufacturer's intent. And there's a lot going on here that is overlooked by too many people. So first of all, what do you have for tires? Well, it is a 17-inch tire, which means it's the sport size. It's a 110 width. So, full-on sport bike would go 120 width. This is just a hair narrower. That's going to allow you a little bit more nimbleness. It's a very common size in this style of bike, this class of bike, even up to the 500s is a very common size. Not with Honda though, they have a 120. Anyway, so you have right away the 17-inch wheel size, diameter. Then you have SportMax GPR 300F tires, which isn't top of the line tires, but in the Kawasaki lineup, my 950cc sportish bike comes standard with these tires. So you have something that's capable of handling far more bike than what you've got here. These are going to be just fine for anything you're going to do. Then you have a single disc instead of a dual disc, which is very common for the class. That's what you want. That's all you need. This thing's not going to be going 300 kilometers an hour, and it's not heavy. We're going to talk about weight in a second. Then you've got radial mount calipers. So what that means is they tend to have a sort of a cheaper, less good mount to your calipers here. This is allowing for more stiffness here, which is what you would see on a race bike. You look at a full-on Honda race bike or any other brand of race bike, it's kind of mounted in this Y-type type setting. That's going to give you good stiffness in the brakes. And then you have upside-down shocks, upside-down forks, and they're not the base model shocks. These are good shocks. We're going to talk about them a little bit later, but they're upside down, which means you have less unsprung weight, you have more stiffness up top. All of this is saying Honda's designed this thing to actually handle. ABS brakes are standard front and rear, decent tires, proper tire size, upside down forks, radial mount things. You've got some style here, but you've also got some function, which is really good. So now let's talk about the heart of this bike. This is interesting to me because if you go with Yamaha, you get a twin cylinder. This has got a single cylinder. If you go with Kawasaki, you get a twin cylinder in their, say, Versus X300 kind of thing. So their 300 cc's are twin. This is a single cylinder. You might think, okay, that's a downgrade, but is it a downgrade? Because although we talk about this as a more beginner-friendly bike, the Honda CRF 300 Rally, which is an adventure bike, dual sport bike that experienced riders absolutely love, it actually shares this engine, and people do like multi-day, multi-week, multi-month tours on that bike even. So you have something here that's known for its reliability, relatively high revving, torquey for what it is, and again, that single cylinder helps you shave weight, it helps shave size. We're going to talk about weight in 1 second because the weight actually is impressive with this. But you have something here paired to a 6-speed transmission. It's got a unique way of doing a number of things. So the balancer in here, when you have a single cylinder popping up and down, you need to put a balancer in there. The balancer is actually mounted in a unique way to reduce vibrations and keep the engine narrow. The airbox is actually back over there. And you'll see I have some battery leads out here. Here at Riverview Honda, you're getting a brand new battery. So you don't have guys like me draining this battery. It's not even connected up. But why are the leads over here? Well, when we talk about a good sport bike, you talk about weight centralization. You want the weight forward and low. Then the battery is actually up forward here, so they don't have it out hanging out back. You've got all the weight forward and low, which is what you want. So the leads here, we're going to connect a 12 volt, or we're going to connect a battery booster box to show you the dash later, because like I said, they don't connect the batteries here until you buy it, which means you're getting actually that new battery. So really interesting engine here because, yes, it's purposed here for a beginner bike, but it's something that experienced riders absolutely love on the Rally 300 bike. So I normally don't take a look at this angle of the bike because it accentuates what a lot of people want to take off, which is sometimes you go with the fender eliminator there. But I want to point out a couple things that you don't normally see on this class of bike, even this year in 2025. Now this is a 2024 bike. I'll review the 2025 again when it comes out. So if you have questions, we'll make sure we get you fully updated. But you do have full LED lights there and LED signals. That is not something that's standard on every bike. Even bikes that have been redesigned for 2025 in North America, not every one of them at the entry-level price point. Sometimes you have to step up for the LED signals and lights. Now this has a fairly small rear seat. I am totally fine with that. It is capable and legal for you to take a passenger on this bike. They even have little hand grips down here. But what this is really going to be used for is a way to mount a tail bag or something like that. This is a 300cc bike. Just because you can take someone doesn't mean you should. And if you have to take someone around town, not a big deal. But this is going to be the most fun when you ride alone. So let's talk about riding alone with this. There's a couple other cool features about this. And this is where that point is that I wanted to make that I told you to wait for. So before we show you the dash on this bike and talk about some of the controls, let's talk about that one key spec that really surprised me. This bike, people ask, why wouldn't you just buy the CB500? Especially as you're starting out, that's going to give you more legs, it's going to help you start longer. Well, there's a couple key reasons. First of all, the one big spec difference between this and the 500 is this is over 100 pounds lighter than the Honda CB500F. So the same bike as this with the 500cc engine actually weighs 101 more pounds than this one does. What that does is gives you something that's very light, very maneuverable, very sporty, and it also has more suspension travel. So if you're commuting around busy, bumpy streets, you've got a little extra suspension travel. If you're a newer rider that wants a lighter bike, this one is significantly lighter. And because of that 100+ pound weight difference, you're not giving up as much performance over the 500 that you would think you are. And it also has a little bit higher revving engine, which can be fun. All right, let's take a look at the controls. So we've talked about why you may want to buy this over Honda's 500, but why would you want to buy this over other beginner bikes? Well, let's start right here at the top of this fork. You can see the Showa SFF BP shock. Basically, what you need to know if you're a beginner rider is it's just a much better shock than you typically get on a bike in this class. So you have really good suspension here. What that means is as you grow and you want a little bit faster bike, if that happens to you, as you grow in your experience, you can get that, but this is a bike that of course will retain its value because of its high quality components, but it's also a bike that you could turn into a little bit of a track bike, a race bike, a project bike. It's got the components that can help you have a fun little track day. So let's turn on the dash here. Nothing too fancy here. You've got all the information you need and not a whole lot of what you don't. Again, this screen, I will tell you right now, it is much clearer in person than it is on camera. So again, if you're seeing some glare here or you're seeing it's hard to read, don't worry about that too much. First of all, we've seen a dash like this before on the CBR500, I believe it was, that we looked at. Maybe it was the, I can't remember which one it was. Might have been the, no, this is the CBR500, similar. Anyways, what you have is first 3,000 RPM up the top, and then everything where you're riding here from about 4,000 right up to 10,500 RPM red line. Got a nice clear tack there, big speedometer here. Little things in here too. You've got the gear indicator. It is a 6-speed transmission, so that's helpful. You've also got a little side stand notification, so instead of having a light, it tells you side stands down. ABS light, low fuel light, in addition to the flashing when it's low, and of course the neutral light there as well, in addition to the gear indicator. Clock up top, and then of course you can cycle through some things here. So if I select the right one here, you can cycle through, what do we got here? Trip A, trip B, and then you've got the sort of a lap timer or a timer, and back to your total kilometers. So pretty basic dash, but it gives you everything you need in a bike like this. But let's take a look at the controls. So over here on the clutch side, you do have a very, very light clutch, and that is designed in there for a reason. It's not just that it happens to be a light clutch, it is a slipper and assist clutch. And what that means is if you have the bike revving up nice and high and you just dump the clutch, instead of risking the rear wheel skidding, this clutch will actually try to slip for you to maintain traction on the rear wheel. What that is they brought it in as a race feature initially, and it became a really good beginner bike feature as well for everybody because it makes for two things. One, better high performance, and two, it gives you the ability to make some mistakes, and it gives you a lighter clutch lever pull. So as you have a bike with lower displacement, you're gonna be zipping through the gears, even through town. Hey, if you gotta pull that clutch lever a whole bunch of times, it's gonna be pretty light. Now, you've got typical Honda stuff here. You've got larger buttons than you would have on some other bikes. I think this is also good for beginners. You've got a little flash to pass here. So if you're trying to get someone's attention, you can flash that LED headlight at them to get their attention, but you can lock your high beam on like that. You have the horn down here, and then you have the signals right like that. So again, signals, all those switches are a little bit bigger than some of the other bikes in its class. Over on the far side here, we'll just zip across the dash while we're here. You've got nothing too fancy, just a kill switch and a start switch over there. Now, one thing I want to point out with a bike like this, instead of something like a race bike, you have proper handlebars the whole way around. Now, I say race bike, there's, you can convert this to anything you want, but some of them have clip-ons, and then you don't have as many mounting points. If you want to put your phone on this, or you want to put some sort of GPS or something else on there, you've got a lot of mounting points here, from the little bit wider bar through the center, a little bit narrower bars up at the edge there. You've got the ability to put what you want where you want it. Let's take a quick look at the headlight. Remember, I am using a booster pack as the battery, so you will see that, but let's take a quick look at the headlight because there's a couple things that I like about this bike, which will be designed for beginners. All right, I am zoomed in far too close to this headlight, but I want to show you one thing that's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see it's got a little bit of a halo here and a halo there. So that's like a daytime running light. And then of course you have the bright LED light down there, and if we do the flash to pass, you can see how that would definitely get someone's attention on the road. So all of these things are good. First of all, a bright white LED headlight is something, whoops, let's try that again. I'm trying to zoom out, there we go. Bright white LED headlight is something that is going to be helpful to the rider because they can see better, but it also helps them be seen. And speaking of being seen, on these single headlight bikes, I really like when they light up the marker lights as well. So that gives you a little more width on the road at night, especially with a darker bike. A lot of guys like to wear the darker clothes. A lot of people like to wear the darker clothes. So of course you have a little bit extra light just to give your bike some more width, some more presence on the road. All great stuff for any rider, but especially for beginning riders. So let's talk about who this bike is for, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons that you're gonna have with this bike. First of all, when I sat on the bike, one thing I didn't mention is the seat is fairly firm. Now, one thing that I found, and this is something that I'm gonna try to help beginner riders out, firm does not always mean uncomfortable on a motorcycle. If you go on very rough roads, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. Seats are replaceable. If you like everything else about this bike, you can replace that. I don't think this is going to be that uncomfortable because while it's very narrow at the front where the bike is narrow, that allows you to reach the ground. It's very wide at the back, and it does give you a little bit of space to move around, especially for a bike that is not quite as large as some other bikes. Now, I say not quite as large, like you said, like I said earlier, it fits me just fine. The other thing I'm gonna tell new riders is something that you're gonna probably find a whole bunch of people disagree with. If you're a new rider, you have to remember, what do you want to fall in love with? Do you want to fall in love with speed, or do you want to fall in love with motorcycling? There are generations of riders. When motorcycles gained massively in popularity, this would have been considered a big bike. This would have been considered a bike with pretty good power. So one thing to remember is a lot of people are saying, oh, that bike's too slow. Now, if you're buying into motorcycling purely to have speed, then yes, this is going to be the wrong bike, and Honda's got another one just up the lineup that you can try, the 500, and you can move up from there. However, if you're buying into motorcycling because you want to fall in love with motorcycling, this is really a great option. Like I said, it's got good suspension, it's got good suspension travel, so that's going to give you a little bit more forgivingness out on the city streets, but it also is something that gives you a bike that is very, very easy to ride, easy to balance. We got another motorcycle coming in here, so don't worry about the noise. But one thing I want to say about this bike for sure is having that lighter weight, having the good seating position, and then having the decent quality components on it is going to allow you to become as good of a rider as you want to be. As you learn lean angles, as you learn braking, as you learn all these different things, you're going to be a better rider on a bike like this if you want to be. Now, if you want a bike with more speed in the future, like I said, turn this into a project bike, sell it as a good resale value because, like I said, the thing is bulletproof as far as reliability. It's something that a lot of beginner riders should be looking at, even if they're not. Now, you can spend more and get higher CC beginner bikes, but you may be giving up some components, especially something like the suspension on here and other types of things. So you're getting a pretty decent bike with that less weight, easy to ride, good components. This is definitely a bike I would recommend to newer riders and even returning riders looking for something just to zip around town. One final thing I will point out, my current bike that I own is 948cc. This is 247cc. Mine is a 4-cylinder sport bike. I've got Brembo brakes, all kinds of things. It still has the radial mount calipers. It's quite similar to this bike. It has the same tires as this. That is a bike that is very capable of well beyond highway speeds. This bike and my current bike are both bikes that I would seek out those 80 km/h, 50 mph speed limit type roads, and that's where this bike's gonna absolutely shine. So even with all that more power, if you fall in love with motorcycling, you're seeking out those types of roads. Is it highway capable? Yes, it is. Where are you gonna enjoy it the most? On those 50 mph, 80 km/h roads, which is exactly where I ride with a bike with 4 times the cylinders of this and way more displacement as well. So one thing to keep in mind is you can have all the enjoyment you want on a bike like this. All right, there is my review of the CB300F. Like I said, if you have questions, 300R, excuse me. If you have questions and you wanna know more, make sure you let me know because like I said, Riverview Honda is absolutely awesome. There's a link in the description, you can check them out, and they give me complete access to their entire vehicle lineup. If you have questions about some of the specs and maybe I didn't mention everything that you wanna see, make sure you check out Honda's website as well. That's where you can find all the specs. I try to cover things that aren't covered in the spec sheet. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll talk to you in the next one.